Reacting to everything from day one, a little mock draft later probably, and then, going over everything that happened in day one, and then reacting to everything in real time from day two. That's what we're going to talk about on a special live edition of Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me as always is Shawn Siegele. Find out his great work over at RotoViz. And Shawn, I am so excited to talk with you about everything that happened yesterday, and that doesn't even get into the fact that today is always so fun. There are so many landing spots that happen on day two that matter so much for fantasy. I mean, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the draft, right? Like, we know that day one is obviously the premier players that are getting the big draft capital. There's some really interesting landing spots there, but some of them were kind of known. Some of them we kind of had an idea where they might go. Day two, you start to get that's interesting for the veterans on that team. And, that's, great draft capital for that prospect that we were trying to see. But there's a lot of interesting running backs out there that are going to go. We'll see where some of these wide receivers end up. We'll see which wide receivers the NFL likes, because we don't really know that quite yet. It's going to be a fun day two. We're going to be here. Man, it's going to be like 5 hours, I think. We've done this the last few years. It's usually pretty long. How are you doing?
Good. As you said, day two is the day for fantasy. Now, we were lucky enough to get quite a few interesting players going off the board in round one last night. This draft is so good at running back that maybe day three will actually be the day. And yet we still got several running backs in the first round, so we already know where they are obviously going to go. I was hoping that Henderson was going to sneak into the back of round one. I mean, then I know about the skill players. So when the Chiefs come on the board, I'm like, take Burden, take Henderson. And they probably felt they needed to take an offensive lineman, but an injured offensive lineman, take one of these guys who's healthy. So, we'll see where those guys come off. Burden certainly somebody who, we suspected might fall, but it is still a disappointment for him to get out of round one.
It is. It's a disappointment on Burden. Henderson, another one, as you mentioned. We were kind of thinking, he might go ahead of Hampton, but Mania and Hampton was always kind of expected to be the RB2. That would have been a little bit of a surprise. Hampton goes easily in round one at 22. A lot of people had him mocked to the Broncos at 20. He goes past the Broncos, and then their division rival 2 picks later are like, all right, fine, then we'll take him. Happy to do so. And then Henderson doesn't go the next 10 picks, as you mentioned. Simmons, the report came out that the Chiefs pick, I knew you'd go right to the Chiefs pick, but the report came out that his medicals were good. He was supposed to have gone much higher, was the sort of the discussion. So both the Eagles and Chiefs picks at 31 and 32 by most of the post first round grade type stuff that I saw today, just kind of floating around on social and things like that. It was both of the Super Bowl teams got 15 pick values relative to the, whatever the consensus was. That's obviously not always 100% accurate or anything, but that's what the Eagles have made a living off of, right? Is drafting these dudes that no one else wants to draft for whatever reason. They're like, all right, we'll just draft off the consensus big board. You're going to give us ADP value. Basically, they're that guy. And then the Chiefs were kind of that guy this year as well. They got an offensive lineman. We had Davis Maddock on Ship Chasing last night, and he was really rooting against Trayvon Henderson going there. I was hoping the Chiefs might make up for taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the 32nd pick years ago. You've talked about it so many times on the show over the years that they had an opportunity to take a potentially explosive running back in that first round pick when they did that a few years back. They seem to have learned the lesson that they don't need to actually use first round picks on running backs, as opposed to we could have taken Jonathan Taylor. The lesson was maybe that they drafted the wrong one, right?
Yeah. So you pass on Jonathan Taylor, you pass on Breece Hall, you pass on Trayvon Henderson. All of those kind of at your own risk. Henderson, a guy who has a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs to his game, which has certainly made the Detroit Lions offensive line play up. You do need to have an offensive line. You also need to have players that the defense has to account for The Detroit Lions have that. The current version of the Kansas City Chiefs do not.
Yes. But I mean, they took a lineman here. Like, they're trying to address that. I want to ask you. I want to start on a player that I think you were not particularly high on through a lot of the early process. There's so many players. I haven't had a chance to talk to you at all today that I was curious about your thoughts on. I had a lot of fun on Chip Chasing talking to those guys. Emeka Egbuka is a guy that I know you were a little bit skeptical of from a profile perspective. He has some interesting, like, per route volume earning stuff, some of the things that I looked at. So when we did our wide receiver show a week or so ago, I was a little bit more like, oh, he's kind of interesting. And as you talked through it, I mean, there's some questionable stuff there with sort of the ball in hand stuff, broken tackles, evaded tackles after the catch. He's a slot receiver, probably. I know Pat Corain on Ship Chasing last night was saying maybe that's an unfair characterization. Maybe he actually can play outside in those things. I think he gets characterized as this high floor but low ceiling type, which is maybe also fair. It's hard to tell. You know, in your write-up recently, you did we'll reference this several times, but over at RotoViz, you just did a recent, right before the mock, before the actual draft, a rookie, basically a list of your rookie rankings, tiered rankings for rookie drafts for Dynasty. I think you had Egbuka up to 202 by the time you published that. I was chatting with you a little bit when you were still putting that together, and I think you had him a little lower even before, but he moved up there, and I think in your write-up you said, I couldn't really move him any lower than this based on the expected draft capital and those things. He does go 19 overall. He was the most interesting landing spot on night one to me because the Bucs went out and re-signed Chris Godwin at the 11th hour. They waited almost until free agency. He was one of those signings that happened like an hour before free agency or the tampering period opened. They give him a bunch of money. Like, he's tied there now for a couple of years. That tends to happen with big free agent contracts, essentially. He was about to hit unrestricted free agency. They gave him a bunch of guarantees, which means that he's not going to be cut even after this year. Probably, I think there was maybe an out after 2 years, but it would carry a decent amount of dead money. It's probably more like a 3-year deal at minimum. And we know the reason I bring him up is, I mean, receivers move around a lot. They do have Mike Evans as like a true X receiver. They can use the other two guys and do different types of, stacked formations, bunch formations. They'll do all sorts of stuff, obviously. We see that a lot at the NFL level. But if Egbuka's better in the slot, Godwin is this guy that over the course of his career, when he's played more in the slot, has had his best seasons. And when he's played more outside, has tended to be more mediocre as a producer. And so you go and sign him to this huge deal to be presumably your slot receiver for the next several years. And then in the first round, the way I was putting it last night, I was like, how do you not have someone else on your board? I understand the idea of best player available, but there are so many positions in the NFL, to building an NFL roster. You got to have other players that are at least somewhat of a need. If you're getting essentially a slot at best player and you're the guy you just re-signed to bring back as a slot at best player, it's just a bizarre fit in that regard for me, even if they think he was the best player on the board there. I think it's certainly not ideal for Jalen McMillan, which was the initial response. He can play in 3 receiver sets, but I don't know that I love him playing in 3 receiver sets with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Now, Godwin's rehabbing a major injury. Evans is getting up there, missed some time last year, finally got the 1,000 yards in week 18 to keep his streak going. But one of these years, that 1,000 yards streak is going to end. He's had some hamstring issues. He's had some things. There's a lot of uncertainty, I would say, 3 years down the road with the Bucs wide receivers. So it's probably not a bad thing to just keep building and being strong there if you think he's a really strong receiver. I'm curious what your read was on this, maybe especially coming at it from more of like he's a high floor type, but maybe low ceiling type prospect that he now gets stuck behind 2 Pro Bowl wide receivers. What do you think that's going to mean for the Bucs?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you had any insight into, what their trade plans were, because one of the things with it is that, I mean, these guys do seem somewhat locked in, and you have an older player with an injury, but he's the one who's definitely locked in, right? So that part is tricky. Godwin and McMillan combined for 88 slot targets a year ago. I mean, Kate Otten, 47 of his 87 come out of the slot. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't run formations with these guys all in the field. You obviously can. I think that we sometimes get kind of overly caught up in this idea, kind of as you mentioned, if this guy's a slot, this guy isn't. McMillan and Ibuka probably do very different types of things out of the slot. You're trusting your offense to be run in an interesting, dynamic way. We did a full show, if not really several shows, on building an absolute juggernaut, having this crazy offense. The Bucs, I think, are a better team top to bottom than people realize. So in some ways, they're probably better set up to make a luxury pick than some other teams. And yet it is sort of weird because when I do the final write-up on Ibuka, I was mentioning, you've got this off the charts character situation that everybody around him seems to love him. I do think that part is important. You can argue for the strong route running. You can argue for athleticism that doesn't actually show up in the production, and maybe it would in the future, right? He has this supposed 4.45 at his pro day. So again, you have this very high floor, but when you make a luxury pick at this spot in the draft and you're planning for the future, usually it's at a position where you're like, this guy should simply not be there. And when we look at Ibuka overall, most of the data would suggest that the only reason he was being considered in the first round anyway is because the class is so weak at receiver. Mm-hmm. And so if you're really more making like a mid-second round pick as a luxury pick for the future, that's where it gets a little bit weird. Right. But again, I mean, maybe their evaluation on Ibuka is the one that's correct.
Yeah, maybe they see him as a top 10 overall player, and then at 19, it's like we just couldn't let him go. But that's essentially what it seems like when they go and get a guy that seems a little bit redundant. Browns made the first pick of the night while we were chatting there. They go linebacker. They stay put. It was interesting to see them having the first pick in the second round. A lot of people have talked about Shadur Sanders as a scheme fit there. They also have the fourth pick in the second round, so they'll be back up here in a moment. I thought they might start day two with Sanders there. Josh Norris over at Underdog was talking about how Trayvon Henderson would be a fun fit in one of these picks for the Browns as their new sort of number one running back. They go linebacker. Carson Schwessinger. Oh, there it is. Popped up on my other screen, Sean. It's our guy, Jaden Higgins, to Houston, to the Texans to play with C.J. Stroud. I say our guy because I know you're really high on him. And I was talking to you about a pre-draft rookie draft in one of my Dynasty leagues and went ahead and took Higgins after some discussion with you. So he's now on one of my Dynasty rosters already. I got him at 202 in the pre-draft, and I was hoping he'd go early here for that reason because he seemed like that next receiver. You really liked him. Couple of years at Eastern Kentucky, not Western Kentucky. We talked about this a little bit on the show last week. Eastern Kentucky, hard to find his data. And when you do find it, you're a little underwhelmed. It seems like they had a pretty big spread offense. He only had like 700 yards. Several guys were in this like 700-yard range on that offense. He goes to Iowa State. Nonetheless, he's able to transfer into a D1 school and has two really great seasons at Iowa State. And when you watch him play, he's really good. You talked about his really low drop rate. When I went and watched his highlights, he's really good with the ball skills, right? There's some like route running concerns in those things. He had a too high rate of contested catches for some people, but he wins the ball. I like the way that he plays the ball in the air. He's a fun dude to watch. He's got some real NFL size. He's like 6'4". He's got some speed, right? What is it about him that you really like?
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Go for a run, take a nap, hang out with friends, read a book. So many options. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The best way to squeeze some more into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make that a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. I began therapy in early 2023 and I found it has helped me set boundaries, learn positive coping skills, and add a lot to my day-to-day, and some of that being prioritization, to be able to focus on what is important at that time rather than trying to focus on everything that is going on in my life at that exact moment, which leads you to not be in the moment because you're thinking about stuff that is out of your control. And having that awareness has helped me throughout my day today, and that is something that I have found to be very positive for me. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/RotoViz today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/RotoViz.
Well, I think that this is sort of your McMillan arbitrage pick. And one of the things, Ben, I thought was very exciting from day one was how early McMillan went.
Yeah.
It's just kind of weird. I mentioned this, I think, on one of the shows, but you know how when you end up doing this stuff and then just you have this, little moment where you see somebody in person just kind of randomly. He walks into this Arizona softball game ahead of me one day, and very friendly, taking pictures of folks, exchanging handshakes with the facility people there. And I mean, he just looks like a superhero. And when you look at McMillan's numbers, you're like, yeah, he is. You watch him play, you're like, yeah, he is. I thought he should have been a top 10 pick. I thought it was really strange when people talking about him falling. That was awesome. So then you come back on day two. And one of the things here, I did have Higgins and Burden still both ahead of Ibuka and Golden after round one last night. So did the live updates on my mock, kind of the post-draft, but live version of it where you're moving people up and down. And, one of the things when that happens is you're thinking, okay, well, if Higgins and Burton don't go early in round two, this is going to look bad. At the same time, you're expecting them generally in that range. And if you had Ibuka and Golden down in round two, knowing they were going to get drafted in round one going in, it'd be really weird to come off of that and immediately be like, oh, well, they actually went where we were expecting. I got to move them up. I kept them more or less in the same spot, but I mentioned we do need Higgins and Burton to now go, which they do here. I think this is a great spot, great situation.
Burton hasn't. Higgins goes off before Burton, which is a little bit interesting. Burton, throughout the process, I know early on in the mock drafts, the expected draft capital based on like average mock draft, he was at like 23 for a while. And then it started to slide, and then it was like, oh, he might actually be a second-round pick. I think he finished with a lot of the mock drafts and the averages right outside the first round. I think his average on a couple of the sites that I was looking at was like 35, 37, stuff like that. So in these next few picks was the expectation. The point is he was, and him and Ibuka were similar in that regard. He was expected to be in sort of the late first, early second discussion. Higgins, not necessarily. This feels high for what his expectation was, which, makes that very exciting. For him to go ahead of Burton is pretty fascinating here. And the Texans, they hit on a similar player, on Nico Collins a couple years ago, a bigger body and outs. I mean, he's going to be another outside wide receiver. It'll be interesting to see. I'm excited for Higgins there. I mean, I think that's a fun fit.
And we got to get into a little bit more of actual Higgins numbers here in a sec. But then we also, I think, talked on the show about how we did make a trade for CJ Stroud in our RV Triflex League just last week. And this is perfect for us from that perspective as well. One of the reasons I think that Higgins can be a great complement to Collins is that last year he was used all over the place. Draws 56 of his targets in the slot. He has 44 underneath, 56 intermediate, 36 deep targets. One of the kind of cool stats for him, which is also a little bit of a red flag for his teammate Jalen Knoll, who had a spectacular combine as well, is that Higgins was actually better on the underneath types of players, significantly better evasion numbers, had a higher catch rate. Higgins has 5 100-yard games against Big 12 opponents last year. You mentioned the low drop rates. He's a 91st percentile freak score guy. He's an 87th percentile explosion score guy. This is somebody who over the last 2 years put up a lot of numbers, did it out of a variety of alignments. He can do it at different levels. He's good with the ball in his hands. He's a really good athlete. He's big. We talked a lot about McMillan being like a slightly more dynamic version of Drake London. I think we could maybe put Higgins in a similar type of category. And so for an NFL team drafting him, you're getting a nice price on that type of profile if in fact the profile plays up to what some of these numbers and athleticism are. But again, when you succeed at multiple levels, when you're multifaceted, when you're big, when you're athletic, when you have production, it doesn't mean you're going to succeed, but it's not like a very narrow one path type of way. So I think you've got multiple paths to success, then both you and the team have more ways you can get this done.
Yeah, he's going to be on the field. He's going to get opportunities. Seattle traded up. People were in the chat talking about maybe they're coming up for a QB. They go safety. That Nick Emanwari guy who was a first-round consideration. I just saw his RAS chart come over. The relative athletic score from Kent Lee Platt is a perfect 10. He's one of the most athletic safeties we've seen. He goes to Seattle. And then I see from Ari Merov, the My Sports Update guy, that the Browns with that second pick did go running back, Sean. They did go Ohio State running back, Sean. They did not take the Ohio State running back that I wanted them to take, Sean. They took the guy that slid a little bit in your last mock. Quinshon Judkins goes ahead of Trayvon Henderson here at number 36. And looks like he's a bigger back. He's got size. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, because we talked about this at the end of last year, was how some of the bigger backs seem to do a little bit. The way that I was putting it was like better than I expected them to in last season. Like that was one of the sort of big takeaways from the 2024 fantasy season, really in trying to like parse the running back scoring, was that you had a lot of guys like David Montgomery. You had Najee Harris had his best year. He's not great or anything. Josh Jacobs didn't really do much, but scored a lot. Because we've talked about how defenses are getting lighter and getting smaller, and then some of these more physical backs, bigger backs, may be able to just sort of fall forward for a couple extra yards on enough carries that starts to become, and it becomes more effective in the red zone and those types of things. Judkins, you described to me, is sort of the Josh Jacobs of this tandem to do the Alabama comp. He's the Josh Jacobs and Trayvon Henderson, sort of the Javid Best, the explosive one, the lighter one, but the one that can hit home runs. The guy that maybe only gets 15 touches a game in some setups, but those 15 touches can be very impactful 15 touches. Judkins is more going to be your next Nick Chubb. He's not that good, but we can give him 25 carries and we feel good about that, right? Did they make a mistake here in going him over Henderson? You get those cold weather games in Cleveland down the stretch. You need some physicality. Defenses are getting lighter. This maybe is a pretty good fit for Judkins.
Yeah, I think so. I like it. I've told you that I've been drafting him quite a bit. I mean, he's one of these guys where I really don't think he's getting the full credit. Now, we had Scott Barrett on OT. He had some great points about how inefficient Judkins has been. But I mean, my just very first sentence into Judkins in the mock talks about how he was overshadowed by Henderson at Ohio State, but he may be the better NFL player after confirming the 3-down upside with a 4.48 40, the 98th percentile explosion at 221 pounds. That all goes to what you were talking about. Henderson gets the top athletic score from Next Gen, and yet Judkins, right, the big back, had a tick faster 10-yard split. We're talking about a guy with 1 yard less than 1,700 scrimmage yards as a freshman. And that second season as well, where his yards per carry numbers are terrible, he had the most broken tackles of any power conference back in the last 5 years. And so, again, I mean, you prefer the explosion, you prefer the yards, especially when you're talking about in the NFL as a fantasy back. And yet when we think about a player who could be a better NFL player than he was a college player, I mean, this is the guy who could do it. Someone who's big, someone who's crazy athletic, someone who breaks a lot of tackles. He's not a bad receiver. Talk about getting the volume. I mean, I would not be surprised at all if Judkins, and there are many ways in which Judkins is somewhat similar to Hampton, except for some of the efficiency, which again, you're probably looking at a different caliber of schedule as well there. When you're talking about size, you're talking about youth, you're talking about athleticism, talking about flexibility. Judkins now seems like he's off to the races.
Yeah, and I apologize. I kind of misrepresented where you were at on Judkins, because I remember our conversation on the running backs a few weeks ago, and you talked about both these Ohio State backs together in that next group, and you still had him in your most recent tiered rankings list as the next running back after Henderson. But I just remembered seeing the red next to his name. You had moved him down a couple slots, but behind some risers at other positions. And so not necessarily I mean, when I say you moved him down, you had him at 108 in Superflex, and you have, some key players ahead of that. Trayvon Henderson, a tier ahead of that, a guy that I know you really, really like, because you like those lighter, explosive backs that can be the next Jamal Charles or the next I almost said Javid Best, not Javid Best. Why can't I think of?
Well, I sort of like what Gibbs did last year. I mean, for me, that's what all these teams should be looking for.
Jahmyr Gibbs was very good last year. Very, very good. So Judkins goes to the Browns, and you're the one who, to me, as I've talked to you and seen other opinions, has seemed steadfastly higher than market on Judkins. And even as you slid him a little bit, you still had him as your RB4 in your most recent rankings. Again, that was pre-draft. Good landing spot for him. Good draft capital for him. Certainly exciting. We'll see when Henderson goes, presumably very soon. He was a candidate to go in the first round based on some of the latest reports toward the end of draft season. The Raiders are trading right now out of number 37, the next pick after Judkins. The Dolphins are coming up. They like fast, explosive players. They got rid of Mostert. They still have Devon Achane. Maybe they'll think that they need to come get Trayvon Henderson and just create a two-headed elite running back. I mean, that wouldn't be fun for Achane or anything, but we'll see what they do.
Really need some other positions.
They need something other than their like three good players that they have. Yeah, that would be helpful. Patriots pick next after that. That's a team that could certainly be in the market for an explosive back, something to pair with Ramondre Stevenson. Obviously, Vrabel taking over there. There was some thought that they might even be considering Genty in the first round, right? And then the Bears pick, followed by the Saints, followed by the Bears again. The Bears are picking twice in the next 5 picks. That at 10 was one of the most mocked landing spots for Genty. Of course, they went Colston Loveland. Sean, we're going to have to talk about the tight ends at some point here as well that went on day one. But if the Bears land Trayvon Henderson, the Jahmyr Gibbs comps, the Ben Johnson scenario. I mean, we know that Ben Johnson loves the running back position. We know that he's going to use the running back position. We have the potential. There's a question in the chat to put a live draft tracker on screen. I could, I suppose, find a way to put. Got to find a simple screen. The Dolphins came up for an offensive guard from Arizona, Jonah Savinia. I probably said that wrong. But they needed offensive.
He probably has a lot of pauses and slurs in it when he says it.
There's probably a few more syllables that I gave him. But the Patriots are up. The Bears are up. I'd love to see Trayvon Henderson go in one of these next few picks. Patriots are up before the Bears, but then the Bears will be up. You said the first name right. I love that. His first name's Jonah. Got that part. ESPN Draft House, pretty simple if you view it by round. Yeah, that's the one I have up here. I guess I could just pull that up if I really zoom it in. It's kind of small, but yeah. All right, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna share this. Here we go. It's got all these why Stephen A attributes Shadur's fall out of the first round to Dion. I just want to the picks. Last night, Pete found a thing that he was able to really just isolate the picks, which was pretty cool. But anyway, this is where we're at now. Yeah. Let's talk about some more of the first round stuff. We have 5 hours to hang out, Sean, and talk. And yet I was like, well, we'll have, in my head, I was thinking we'll have some time in the first part of the third round to discuss all the storylines from last night. We got through Ibuka, basically. There's so many more things that I wanted to ask you about from last night. And we've had, talked about Higgins, we've talked about Judkins. There's obviously going to be so much going on. But I do want to go back to round one. I want to talk to you about rookie draft in particular. You have Gene T going 6. He's your 101. That next tier, I mentioned I was on with the ship chasing guys last night. Everyone seemed to feel very confident that Travis Hunter had to be the 102 now that he went second overall into the Jaguars, who traded up to get him. I do think it's fascinating. I've been very optimistic about Hunter playing both ways and playing a lot of wide receiver. He lands in a place that already has a really dynamic young wide receiver. They talked about, Liam Cohen had a quote last night about him. He's going to play wide receiver first and then sort of DB second. But the way that his profile could play out at the NFL level is one of those things where, because he's so good and because he's so dynamic and because of the things that he can do in other ways, it could limit him from putting up statistical ceilings offensively, right? In this case, I mean, there's a lot of variety of ways that this can happen in football, whether it's like, a tight end who's a great blocker, so he doesn't get to run enough routes or something like that. But in Hunter's case, it's literally that he can play an entirely different position. Because he does that, it could limit, because of, certain odd situations that are unforeseeable. There's a lot of uncertainty. It could limit his ability to have monster offensive seasons, essentially, or however that pans out. And then you also have Brian Thomas there, who can limit any other receiver because he can have games where he gets 15 targets and 12 catches, right? I guess as excited as I was about the trade up and the landing spot, because I think the landing spot's fantastic. You get Trevor Lawrence, you get Liam Cohen, and I do think he's definitely going to play offense. And I wrote a whole article yesterday before the draft, just kind of waiting around, kind of put together my whole take on Travis Hunter and what I think is kind of in store for him and what's so fascinating about him. To me, that landing spot there's so much unique stuff here, but to me, that landing spot was a thing where it was like, well, does it cap him just a little? I'm curious if you think he's the clear 102 or two other players that would have been in that discussion who got awesome capital. Do they, and landing spots, do they move ahead of him? And that's Tet McMillan, who goes 8th overall. You just mentioned him a bit ago. There was some discussion he might slide. We both couldn't really understand that in the wide receiver show recently. He does go 8, and he goes to Carolina, where Bryce Young played better. Dave Canales has been good at designing an offense, and I think getting the ball to the wide receivers that he kind of wants to build around. I was really excited about Deontay Johnson in this offense last year. It obviously didn't pan out favorably, but in the 7 games he played there, he had 3 games where he had, I think, it was something like 100 yards and a TD in 3 of those games. He had meaningful production across a few games. You had Jalen Coker having meaningful production. You had Adam Thielen late in the season having meaningful production. McMillan steps in, should be the clear number 1, runs all the intermediate routes really, really well. There's some question about whether he can actually win deep. I don't know that's this is a great spot for him to just go rack up a ton of intermediate targets. And then if he does do some stuff deep, he could be a monster statistically. So I think, he's clearly in that tier at the least. And then you have McMillan and Hampton, the other running back that goes in the first round, goes 22 to the Chargers. They have Najee Harris, but they have Najee Harris on a 1-year deal. It's a limited amount of money. I do think Najee's going to be a little bit of a workload concern for Hampton in the first 2 months of the year. Hampton's going to be a pretty clear redraft play for back-weighted production. And then certainly 2026 and beyond, it will look like his backfield in a Jim Harbaugh offense with Najee being just on the 1-year deal. He's another guy that's got to be in that tier right now. I'm curious what you think of those 3 guys, because I thought last night was a little underwhelming, but I thought those 3 guys, it was very positive for all of them.
And this is one of the reasons that these rookie drafts are so much fun at fantasy football. Trayvon
goes as I'm talking and asking you that question. He does go to the Patriots, so he doesn't make it one more pick to the Bears. I would have liked him with Ben Johnson. They did a bunch of work on the offensive line this offseason. It would have been pretty fun to see him land with the Bears there. He does go to the Patriots, I think he'll pretty quickly displace Ramondre Stevenson, who's, I think, 27 now already. That's pretty exciting, right? Alongside Drake May.
Is it?
You're not that.
I mean, do we still have concerns about the quality of just what this offense is going to be like if it's a team that really wants to score? And I want my running backs, I want all these players, to go to teams that want to score. And so from that perspective, maybe a little bit underwhelming. And I think that once you put a competent staff back in place, then Ramondre becomes interesting again too, because his main problem is just holding onto the football. Now, that's going to get you benched and maybe not ever playing again. But when he was out there, this isn't like a guy who, I mean, he had some stretches at times where he wasn't as good. The main problem again last year is simply that he was fumbling at a pretty crazy rate. Then before we get into Trayvon, let's answer that previous question, or at least discuss it, because one of the things with Hunter is that it seems to me like people have been misunderstanding kind of where he is on both sides of it. When people were assuming he was going to be a defensive back and would play a little bit of receiver, they were far too low on him and didn't seem to understand that he was going to play both. Once you then jump way up, though, you have similar problems in the other direction, where, again, I mean, the whole idea here from a dynasty perspective is that you're going to play both. This was an insane trade, right? This was absolutely unjustified by the Jaguars, unless you're saying this guy is going to play both positions, as you said all along, is going to be good at both positions, is going to get a monster contract because he's delivering value at both positions. But once you go back and evaluate Hunter purely as a receiver, I don't know that we then have the results to necessarily push him up to the 102. That, to me, especially when you have concerns about how is it going to all play out, seems overbaked, then especially when you have what you talked about with the competition. And I mean, I was pretty excited about this. I do think that what Liam Cohen does with it should be a lot of fun. I do think he's going to score. But when you look at this group, so I have 3 different tiers through 107, and Judkins did stay in that group overnight, even before the good pick today. Tyler Warren had fallen out of it with his landing spot there with quarterbacks who can't pass the ball and a team that won't have very many pass attempts. But you could make that 3 tiers like I've done, or you can make it just one big tier and have even more humility with it, saying all these guys probably should be in the mix together. The situation for Hunter doesn't seem to be as good as the situation for McMillan, whom we can count on more from a receiving perspective to start with. And then when you think about the upside of these running backs and probably the greater safety with the running backs, because mostly what they need is simply for the coach to say, you're going to get the ball. I think that you can, I mean, certainly you can have Hunter at 2, but if you have him at 2, you can certainly have him at 1. You can have him all the way down at 7. I think that's also fine, because in the same way that he was always undervalued when people were looking at the downsides of playing both ways, he now seems like he's probably overvalued with the idea that he's going to start at wide receiver.
Yeah, I do think if you're saying he's a clear 102, that he probably is. Now, Ron Stewart was on the show, and his case for Hunter at 102 in some ways boiled down to a high floor. He was saying that I feel really confident that he's going to be a good NFL player, that he's so dynamic and he's so good, and what he's been able to do in college, that this guy's going to be able to play, and he's not going to be a massive bust in some regard. And maybe there's more bust risk with some of the other picks.
But isn't part of the reason you make this move as the Jaguars is that you actually have 2 sides and you kind of win if he doesn't bust on both of them? Now, to really make the trade worth it, you need him to be good at both. But you actually have a path for him to be good either way.
What, Sean? We just got Luther Burden to the Bears. The Bears are so funny, man. So they took Odunze last year when they already had a bunch of weapons. They took Loveland on day 1 when they already had Cole Kmet. They took him at 10 to keep adding receiving weapons. I think you're going to tell me that this is disastrous for Rome Odunze. You've been saying pretty much as nicely as you could to me pretty much since the draft last year that Odunze was probably not going to be the type of pro that as a UW alum, I was hoping that he would be. He had a pretty disappointing rookie season. If you look at how many routes he actually did wind up running, I think a lot of people feel like, okay, well, he was blocked and this and that. He wasn't that blocked. He played a lot and he wasn't particularly effective.
Well,
now they go
wide
out.
Receivers coach for the Bears feel comfortable enough with being wrong that he was willing to say, I had him above Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison, which I mean, you don't want to admit that you had anybody above Malik Neighbors.
Yeah. And then when they took Loveland yesterday, because we both think Cole Kmet's at least an NFL starter. I mean, he's a player who doesn't seem to get that respect.
Then I did a draft like right before the NFL draft where it was a super flex draft where I took Brock Bowers like ahead of Jalen Hurts, but then the second tight end at a huge value to his actual value was Cole Kmet. It turned out that wasn't the case. Cole Kmet is like a backup or a trade piece. Then they cleared these guys out in Detroit, right? You cleared out DeAndre Swift, cleared out TJ Hawkinson. That looked weird. And then the timing is different for the two positions, but they replaced those guys with Gibbs and Laporta, who do end up looking better, even though obviously Hawkinson has been good elsewhere. I mean, they're clearing it for their guys, but also Ben Johnson understands that the best way to score every drive is to have the most weapons in the NFL.
That's true. But when they took Loveland, my thought was, okay, we're going to get more 2 tight end sets. We're going to get more power, some power running than throwing off that. They do that with the Lions a decent amount. And then you play Odunze and DJ Moore. Keenan Allen's not there anymore. That all fits. Now that you take Burden, you have essentially one too many wide receivers and tight ends for the standard packages that you may want to run. So now you start talking about some real routes issues for fantasy, whether that's Burden not getting enough routes. I mean, it'd be fascinating to see how he's used. Obviously really great with the ball in his hands, and Ben Johnson seeing something in him, I think is bullish. It's got to be exciting. The new regime came in and took him 39th overall right now. I think you got to be more excited about how he fits into Ben Johnson's plans than Rome Odunze, who was a top 10 pick just a year ago. But Ben Johnson wants Luther Burden. And if he uses him a little bit like Gibbs, for example, a lot of passing around the line of scrimmage, a lot of ball in hand, that's the stuff that Burden was getting knocked for, was that he did too much of that in college. But maybe that's an exciting element here. Maybe he does some backfield stuff. I don't know. It's just fascinating to me to think about Burden and now. Yeah, I mean, I see this as a pretty big negative for Odunze. How does it fit for Odunze? They just re-signed DJ Moore in season last year as well to a multi-year deal. And DJ Moore is the established number one. This is a guy who's been a Pro Bowl wide receiver. Kmet's probably the one that is I'm probably overstating his playing time. Maybe he's just kind of going to be on the outskirts. And maybe it will be 11 personnel. Yeah. Maybe it's 11 personnel. Loveland's out there. Burden's your slot guy. And Odunze's out there as well. And there's your weapons. DJ Moore, Odunze, Burden, and Loveland. I don't know.
You don't want Burden going to a wide receiver depth chart that is this loaded. At the same time, this is basically the best case scenario because Luther Burden is so good with the ball in his hand. And he's clearly the best player in this draft for that at receiver. The question is, can he really do anything else? Can he run real routes? Can he get open? If there's any coordinator in the entire NFL where you worry about that a little bit less and you simply say, okay, manufacturer touches are going to happen. You're going to be able to get the guy the ball in space. Because so many times when these players are drafted, the team then comes out and says, well, we'll just get this guy the ball in space. You're like, it doesn't happen. Space doesn't just exist, right? It doesn't just come in. The other team also knows what you want to do. You think about all of those garbage routes for someone like Jackson Smith and Jigba when he was a rookie. Ben Johnson is going to be able to design an offense where teams have to account for so many pieces. They'll be able to get the ball to Luther Burden. And once he has the ball, good luck. I mean, he's that good in that situation. I think it's pretty damaging to those other two guys. We talk a lot about how Stephon Diggs blew up with the Bills in part because they no longer treated him as either a vertical guy or an underneath guy, but just everything. The underneath stuff for DJ Moore, which is something that he's done pretty well at times. Yeah. And when he's really flourished, you have to have that. I mean, some of that has to go away because that's no longer what you're looking for from him. This will be very interesting. Certainly, if you have Caleb Williams, I think these things are all pretty exciting.
We got to go back to the Bears because, Sean, we are coming out in round 2. This is what I love about the day 2 stream, man. You get some fun stuff right when you get outside of round 1. We are coming out like a fire hose of fascinating situations. We had Higgins right away at 34. We had Judkins at 36. We've only had 8 picks, and we've had 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and we just here at pick 40 got our quarterback, and it's not Shadur Sanders. It's that Louisville geriatric Tyler Shaw or whatever. Shaw. I don't know how to say his name. They were calling him Shuck last night, I think, on Ship Chasing. This guy's like 29. I don't think he's actually that old. What is he, 25 or something? He was in college football for 7 years, played for 3 years at Oregon, and then 3 years at Texas Tech, and then was at Louisville last year. It was the first time he threw 200 passes in a season. His first 6 years, he had never thrown 200 passes in a season at any point. He had to transfer away from 2 programs, and then he finally gets the opportunity to kind of be the starter at a very advanced age, puts up some decent efficiency in the ACC. He's got the prototypical size. He's 6'5", etc. There's some scouts that like the way that he plays. What can you tell us about the Derek Carr's grandfather?
So the Saints are hilarious. I do feel like if you let Sean Payton rack up debts of, a big first world country and then leave, you might as well just do whatever you want after that, which includes things like this. I've read that, people like the fact that he was on a bunch of different teams and has been exposed to a bunch of different systems. I'm not sure how that's actually a positive. One of the things that I've written a decent amount about Jalen Milroe is that he's not Anthony Richardson. He's not Will Levis. One of the things that doesn't necessarily, it's not going to necessarily be predictive of all of these things. Quarterback is a very difficult position to project, right? But Travis May's done some great work with how you would look at and evaluate quarterbacks. It was a big part of the stuff with Bo Nix last year, that you remove play action, you remove jet motion. What I'm doing, I like to look at passes of at least 6 air yards. One of the things with that is it helps me keep honest about guys like Nix, where there's a lot of underneath stuff that is really inflating the completion percentage, all those types of things. Milroe's IQR, so basically his QB rating with charting-based adjustments that SIS does, is far, far better than guys like Richardson and Levis when they came in, which is one of the reasons why I think a team should take a risk on him, given his athleticism. He's a much more interesting prospect from the perspective of actually having that shot to make it, as opposed to just saying, maybe there's a chance type of thing. The numbers for him, not necessarily that different than Dart and Sanders. And for Milroe, back in 2023, they were actually quite good. Now, the Louisville QB is much more of that Will Levis type of prospect where the numbers are bad, right? His adjusted net yards per attempt in that category, the one I just talked about, sort of the scheme adjusted, is more than 2 yards below Milroe, for example. His IQR is down at 83. You have a 25-ish point gap. The on-target percentage, the catchable percentage, again, there is similar to Milroe. It's obviously way below the other 3 guys from this group. The touchdown percentage, extremely low. One of the reasons that some of those other numbers are lower than what the accuracy numbers indicate. I'm not saying it won't work, but these numbers are bad enough that I have basically refused to write about him, even as the buzz started to build that he would go early. Obviously, I'm going to have to do more writing about him when you go. It's not just in the second round, but to where he could be the starter, right? We don't really know how the Derek Carr soap opera is going to play out, but it seems like he's insisting he's not going to play for them. This guy's going to be out there right away. At quarterback, you never know. There are guys with terrible numbers who do come in and succeed, but the Saints have certainly not given themselves the best chance by opting for an old player who is also an unsuccessful player to this point, right? There are problems with Sanders. There are problems with Milroe, but they give you two different styles of QB. Either one you might like for your organization, and they do give you production. This to me is a weird pick, even though it was telegraphed, right? I mean, people were reporting this is going to happen.
Yeah. I just scrolled on your tiered rankings to see, if I didn't remember him in there, see where he landed. He did not land, and you went through 5 rounds. You went all the way to 5-12, and he did not in super flex, and he did not make it. You were throwing in those latter rounds and like tier 10, you were throwing a lot of that's the fun Sean range where you get to throw a lot of the prospects that probably will never amount to anything, but you like the profiles are pretty fun to think about.
I mentioned there were 2 day 3 QBs that would be next if we went into round 6, basically intentionally like saying, I don't think this player who's been mocked into round 2 deserves to be even in that group. But again, I mean, he's going to be a starter, right? He's going to be a starter.
I mean, at this point, if he goes 40th overall, so he turns, to put a real number on this, he turns 26 in September. He will play his age 26 season this year. He was born in 1999. I mean, for those of us who feel old every time we see a date or something like that, every player in this draft other than him is going to be born in the 2000s. But we got a guy who just got drafted in round 2, still born in the 1990s, Sean. So we don't have to feel that old. He will be 26 in September. Now,
and that's important for a variety of reasons, one of which is that athletic trajectories still matter. And if one of your ideas here is that you have a very wide range of outcomes player, you would really want that player to be young because you need to have that time for them to grow, and you just need time for them to succeed, right? If you are saying this is an athletic pick, don't take someone who is already starting to move down the back slope of what we think of for athleticism. I mean, it's very, very problematic.
It's not great. The other part of it that obviously we've talked about and theorized about as it relates to age is just the development path, right? That when a guy is 21 years old, he's got stuff to learn still. Tyler shows, I mean, this guy's a grandfather at this point. I mean, he's a wise old man. So what more can he learn? And then why wasn't he doing more at the collegiate level at those previous stops? He had some injuries and things, but which is obviously why he got to play 7 college seasons. But to not even have great numbers in 2024 at Louisville after kicking around college football for that long and being that much older than all the other players on the field, right? And having been around, like you were saying, some people are making it into a positive that he's played in a lot of different schemes and learned how to had exposure to a lot of different offenses and different football knowledge that could potentially be very helpful for him. How come he wasn't able to put that to good use? I mean, this goes back to why athleticism at wide receiver, when we start talking about Matthew Golden, I'm going to make this point. Why wasn't he able to produce? Why is it not in the numbers? If this was something that was so helpful for him to be at Oregon for 3 years and at Texas Tech for 3 years, why was he not better at Louisville last year? You talked about his profile not even necessarily being that great. Now, if I want to make some type of devil's advocate case, I'll say that at quarterback, you can, and if you're a pocket passer, if you're a 6'5" guy with an arm, I mean, you can be, your peak can last well into your 30s, right? So at age 26, if he's able to come in and actually be a good NFL quarterback, the Saints may be able to get something out of him for 10 years, right? Which is more than some other positions, even when they're 21. I mean, that's just the reality, unfortunately, for some of the other more heavy contact positions and the quarterback position and how it's protected, obviously. And if he is actually a hit, the age thing, he's going to be 30 quick, but you can be 30 at quarterback, obviously. We know that. And you can be 35 and you can be 38 someday. Not ideal at that point. Obviously, you're getting older. But he had one of the most fascinating plays as well in this whole offseason, this whole whatever cycle. You may know what play I'm talking about, but there's a play where he's like running toward the sideline, rolling out of the pocket, and he's about to get like caught from behind, and he just flips the ball underhand to no one. Just like and it gets picked off. I'm pretty sure, like to the defenders. There's no offense. He's just throws like it's the most nonchalant, like hot potato. I just don't want to hold this ball anymore. Throws it across the line of scrimmage. It's, I mean, the only way you could probably describe it is as a brain fart or something. But I mean, an absolutely.
But he's a 26-year-old player with no experience, so you're going to get some of those mistakes.
Right? Like, if you're 26, how did that happen?
I thought you were going to tell me he had made a Will Levis play, but instead of it being returned for a touchdown, it had gone, for a touchdown, and that wasn't the punchline.
No, it is a Will Levis play. I'm just gonna present this. It'll probably, I don't know, get my my YouTube channel like thrown out or something. I don't know, but I have to put this play on the screen. Shawn, watch this play. Okay, way to complete. He just, what was he doing?
I mean, come on. This is the play that we all see ourselves in, right? Where this guy's coming, you're like, no.
No, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to be a part of this. Oh, my gosh. Well, I mean, an all-time fantastic someone in the chat says the combine throw is gold. I must have missed the combine throw, but apparently has another funny throw. Mason Taylor to the Jets, Stephanie says. So we get another tight end here at pick 42, the 10th pick of the day. And we've had like 6 really meaningful ones for fantasy. It's been quite fun so far. Mason Taylor, a little bit more of a blocking tight end, correct?
Well, I think he's going to be able to do a lot. And one of the things here, probably the most frustrating thing is just the position of some of these guys relative to Fannon. I think he's still kind of the trickiest guy to know how to value. Hopefully we find out today and not on day 3. But Taylor, somebody who obviously has those amazing bloodlines. You've got a very young tight end here, and we don't have a lot of young prospects in this draft. That's one of the sort of weird elements of it. Now we know kind of what the reasons for all of those elements are, but you've got 1,300 collegiate receiving yards as a 21-year-old. I mentioned that he had poor tracking numbers at the Senior Bowl, which fit with a yards per route run and after catch results that were, just solid. But then he has the good 40 time at the pro day. I guess I would have, questions of why we're not seeing that elsewhere. But I mean, Taylor is a guy here who, the fit with the Jets for the same reason that the fit for Loveland is problematic. You don't necessarily love that aspect of it, but it does seem like Taylor could be a guy who down the line ends up being maybe like a Pat Freiermuth type of player, where if you ever actually got a viable offense, that he'd be kind of this, mid-career breakout type of guy.
I got the combine throw. Watch this. Again, this is what a 21-year-old Jameis Winston would do at the combine, not a 26-year-old. He does some weird pump fake. He gets his feet completely not at the target, and he tries to do like an Aaron Rodgers flip, and he completely misses the wide receiver. He's nowhere near the wide receiver. It's like some and one mixtape combine thing. Like he just wanted to show off. I don't know what this pump fake is. It's not a real thing. I guess he's stepping up from a, but then why are his feet over there? And then why does he do the jump through? And then,
and this reminds me nothing so much of last night's Diamondbacks game where the Rays try and steal second. You're looking for that bad throw and you steal home at the same time. Catcher throws it back to the pitcher who gets startled and dives out of the way.
Dude, that was funny. I'm at a loss with the Tyler show stuff, but anyway, you were talking about Mason Taylor and they're saying the audio is even better. Someone's like, whoa, in the background. The Saints still get 40th overall.
Well, and we have to look at this from two different directions. One is that it's still a big difference from having picked somebody in the top 5 and maybe traded a ton of capital to get them. But these early second round picks, Ben, are some of the most valuable picks in terms of like what you get for the price in all of football. I mean, Again, if you hit on a QB, none of that's going to matter. It's a little bit like we criticized the Penix selection last year. I still think, if you're going to make that pick, you should have obviously not signed Kirk Cousins. You can't do both things. But once it sort of looks like it's going to work out, you're like, no problem. But the whole point of building a roster and giving yourself multiple passes, the things don't often work out, or they don't always work out. And the more that you work against the probabilities, the less often they work out and the less that you have to work with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we got to think probabilistically with all this stuff. NFL teams don't always like to think probabilistically with their draft selections, which is why this is so fun. It's a fun exercise. I mean, Tyler's show could be great. He'd be a Hall of Famer, and people can play back later when I'm sitting here laughing, going, "This."
When he completes that pass in a game to get the Saints into the playoffs next year, he's going to be like, "See, I was practicing."
Right, and people are going to think I was an idiot, but it's going to be, I don't know. It's just funny. Bears traded out of pick 41. That second pick I was referencing, it makes me think that they really wanted Trayvon Henderson. That's what I decided in my head, and the Patriots ruined all my hopes and dreams. They took Burden. They traded out of that second pick they had in the first 10 picks of the second round. Bills came up to take a D tackle. The Niners also took a D tackle here at 43. The Cowboys are on the clock.
But we've got these tight ends right now who have gone early. You have Warren's slide, not great, but still you're like a mid-first round pick, and you've got this great background. Loveland obviously goes early. Mason Taylor now goes early. We love the tight ends, really like to load up on them in many formats being almost any format that has a tight end premium, and yet all three of these landing spots seem bad to me. Am I missing how these teams are going to be able to use their guys?
No, I don't think you are. I think Loveland going 10 overall to the Bears is obviously really exciting from the perspective that he was the first tight end taken, and a lot of people were really stoked about that. But I do see that as a pretty problematic situation. I mean, we know that the real tight end ceilings often come in situations where there's not a lot of depth at receiver, and they can be like one of the top target earners in an offense. It's going to be difficult with DJ Moore, with Rome Odunze. Potentially, if Cole Kmet's still on the roster with a little bit of a rotation early in his career, possibly. I mean, I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with Kmet. And then now with Luther Burden there as well. And we know that they're going to use the running back position in the pass game and effectively, because that's something that the Lions have done a lot under Ben Johnson. They like to spread it around, the Lions, other than sort of their key guys that they want to get the ball to. They like to have a lot of weapons that they can go to, be difficult to defend, right? From a real football perspective, but not be exciting beyond like their core answers. And I guess I just think Loveland's not going to be the core answer like Amon-Ra St. Brown was for the Lions or Jahmyr Gibbs was for the Lions. He's going to be a part of that group. Like we saw even Laporta last year after a great rookie year become one of those non-core answers. And it's like, well, he gets his when the defense forgets about him because they have a lot of things they can get to. It will be very interesting to see how they utilize all the different players, but I do think a tight end in this situation is not great, and that's the best landing spot. I don't like Tyler Warren to the Colts one bit. You have Anthony Richardson, you have Daniel Jones, you have a real pass volume issue, you have a real pass quality issue, and you have six tight ends already on the roster. These Chris Ballard
got good receivers
loves tight ends
as well.
Yeah, they got Josh Downs. They have good receivers.
I mean, to add some more numbers for the Loveland thing.
Oh,
in premium, right? Laporta, tight end 9 last year in a season where Goff threw for over 4,600 yards, right? And so then you mentioned the problems there in Indianapolis, right? But I don't know that we're going to have it to the same extent. But you have a difference in QB mobility between Goff and Williams. Obviously, you have a big difference in home game environment in Chicago versus Detroit, thinking about the dome versus the weather. You have basically the best versus arguably the worst, or one of the 3 or 4 worst. And then, kind of as you were mentioning with the Colts, this is the team with the 4th fewest dropbacks and the 2nd fewest catchable targets last year. And so you can get better from that and have it still be bad.
Sorry, say that stat again. I was reading a different stat.
So the Colts had the 4th fewest dropbacks and the 2nd fewest catchable targets.
Yeah, and they're going to get worse. I mean, that was with Flacco playing some, and he actually, like when he was in there, he would actually drop back a bunch. But just Richardson and Daniel Jones, I mean, they're going to be bottom 5, not sad again. The idea that they're going to definitely get worse is a little bit bold. Obviously, things tend to regress. But if Daniel Jones plays most of the season, which I think is a very plausible, you're potentially looking at not so extreme of a big part of those numbers right there that you just said is the fact that Anthony Richardson threw so few catchable passes, right? He had a completion percentage of 47%, I think it was, of all qualified passers. The only other guy under 60% was Spencer Rattler at 57%, a full 10 percentage points higher. The rest of the league was 13 percentage points higher at 60% or higher, because that's the way the NFL's played now. And then there's Anthony Richardson down here, 47%. I mean, that's the way that we pick on him, but like the numbers also very much support it. I just want to be clear. Warren is going to a team that's going to still be.
The catchable target element is that he throws vertically, but the vertical passes seemingly would be less valuable to Warren than just the other guys who are already there, who are already pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. He's like a chuck it deep, and maybe you get an explosive play for Alec Pierce, but that's about it, right? And then, I mean, again, Chris Ballard is in love with the tight end position. They still rotated the tight ends a decent amount last year. I brought this up last time in ship chasing, and Pat said some of that was under a different coach. It was, but it continued. They had a lot of tight ends. They continued to use multiple tight ends last year. You don't take a tight end 14 overall and not use him. But I do think the teams, one of the issues with the tight end rotational stuff is how teams will do the different packages. Like they'll use Warren as their 11 personnel tight end, but then when they go to 2 tight end sets, they might take Warren out and have 2 other tight ends be those 2, like Mallory and Mo Alley Cox or something, or like in a 3 tight end set. They don't, like, teams don't always use the same number 1 tight end in their then 2 tight end specific 2 tight end packages. They might go to 2 different ones, or when they go to 3 tight ends in a goal line package because they really want to. Now Warren, it may be because they really want to isolate blocking. Warren, can do everything and would be expected to probably stay on the field. I'm just saying there's these weird scenarios that can occur in a situation that's already bad for pass volume and catchable targets and everything that you're saying. I would want his routes to be 95%, and they're probably not going to be in for the Colts.
It's tricky for a tight end in this situation that, like, one of your main paths to success would be actually scoring a bunch of red zone touchdowns in a situation where the team is not likely to have that many red zone passing touchdowns.
My mom is calling me right now. I would bet you she's calling me to ask me about the Seahawks pick. And I just had a moment that I thought it'd be funny to answer it on air, but I'm gonna let it go. She'll just be like, "Wait, can you explain to me, something random about the Seahawks pick?" Or something about the draft. They're watching the draft and something happened and she doesn't understand what happened and she's just curious. I should invite my mom on stream. Rupesh, I said it would be fun. We'd kill a little time. So those 2 tight ends, we don't love the landing spots, love the draft capital, certainly. They have interesting profiles. And then Mason Taylor goes to the Jets. You got Justin Fields starting and presumably like the clear starter. They're not going to really have a lot of competition. Again, pass volume. We've talked about this a lot over the last few years, Sean. The way that the NFL is moving, the way that defenses are playing, the way that mobile quarterbacks have been an answer to some of the things that defenses are doing. The gaps between the fun offenses for fantasy and the not fun offenses for fantasy, we've called them the haves and have-nots and those things, they've gotten really wide in some cases. And, that was a thing that I remember kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't say laughing at, but thinking was too simplistic in early fantasy analysis 20 years ago. Draft the players on the good teams or what have you, right? I do think there's a big element of modern NFL football that doesn't happen enough in a really like niche landscape for all the people that are really deep into like Underdog and then they get really deep into all the different player profiles that they don't give enough consideration to essentially the probabilistic range for just team fantasy goodness, for how much volume is going to be there. You just said the catchable targets, right? And the Colts offense are so problematic. It's a really tricky situation when you get a team like the Jets, for example. You get Justin Fields in there. They're going to run a little bit more. He's going to scramble more. He's going to take sacks at a decently high rate. When he does throw, we like him as a passer, but probably a little bit of a higher ADOT when he does get rid of it, because he's going to have a tendency to extend plays. He's going to have a little bit of a higher time to throw. I wouldn't expect a Justin Fields tight end to put up a monster season. Now, he may not be the QB for multiple years. Mason Taylor may have a different QB over, a couple of years from now. Who knows how his career progresses? But for me, situationally, I don't want to go into a rookie bet, second round pick, where I may have some concerns over how productive this guy could even be. Over 3 years at LSU, he had 6 touchdowns. He never had any monster, receiving seasons. That's why I was asking you if he was just more of a blocking tight end. Maybe he's got more at the NFL level, but probably not in this setup, right? I mean, you don't even know if he's good. So do you want to make that bet in a situation where the ceiling's not even that high?
Well, just to, take the other side of it, to give these guys a little bit of credit, or to think about what the path might be. One of the reasons I keep mentioning Cole Kmet, and one of the reasons I really thought that Justin Fields should have been starting last season, and I think it's great that he's got an opportunity this year, is that, we had the breakout for DJ Moore with him, but we also had Cole Kmet finish as tight end 8 in premium scoring, right? So not just based on touchdown or something like that. Scored ahead of Jake Ferguson in 2023 with Fields as the QB there. It's possible, if he's good enough, it's possible if the offense is just, say, Garrett Wilson and Cole Kmet, somewhat similar to it was in 2023 with Moore and Kmet, or obviously Garrett Wilson and Mason Taylor. The tricky part is, as you mentioned it, kind of threading that needle and having everybody play well in such a way that it makes that narrow path work. And especially for a rookie, one of the issues I think for all of these guys is you can look at 2026 and say this actually sets up very nicely for all of them. Maybe at tight end, it's even easier to do that than their positions, but the rookie production is really going to kind of set the stage for the trade value that these guys have throughout their entire dynasty sort of lives.
Terrence Ferguson to the Rams from Oregon. I was almost going to say to Oregon.
Ben, this guy, I like.
Another tight end. Yeah, you've been intrigued by him. He's a big athletic dude, right?
He is, and you got more production here. I thought he was going to go later, so I did move him down in the last mock. But you got a 6'5" tight end with a 4.63 40, 39-inch vertical. I mean, this is an athletic profile that's a big deal. And last year, you got 2.5 yards per route. Again, in the way SIS does it, have a little bit higher per route numbers than the PFF, but also big per route numbers in 2022. He had his biggest touchdown season in 2023. So impressive numbers in all 3 of the last seasons in one area or another. He can do more damage with the ball in his hands than some of these other guys who I think have been pushed up, and that's what we really want to see from the tight end position. His drop rate was poor last year, but that was a little bit of an aberration. 2022, 2023, not nearly as big a deal. Dropped only 3 passes, I think, across those 2 years. Evaded 19 tackles on 99 targets in 2022, 2023. This is a situation where I'm surprised he went this early based on kind of how people were looking at it. I'm not surprised he went this early based on his profile, which I really like.
And the Rams are that team, right? They don't even go to the combine famously. They are kind of doing things a little bit different, and they've been hitting pretty well, though. And you're saying this is a guy who has some intriguing elements that maybe the NFL was missing based on some of the reports. Some of the traditional scouting was missing, but the Rams are doing non-traditional scouting. That's kind of been the discussion with them over the last several years. They've been in the market for a tight end. There's been talk about that, and they go ahead and land a guy that you really like. And when they go after a guy, they seem to really like him in a way that I put a little more weight on than some other teams, I guess. I mean, obviously every team drafting a guy likes that guy, but I mean, Kyle Shanahan, for example, will draft a guy, then get him into practice and be like, this is not, did I just pick a name out of a hat? This is not what I thought I was drafting. And then we never hear from him again. Like it's weird. It's like he's not even familiar with the guy that just got drafted onto his team. a lot different, I think, with the Rams and their process. They seem a lot more deliberate. When they select a guy, they tend to have plans for that guy. They like to trade back. This is, I think, their first selection in this draft as well, right? Because they traded out of the first round yesterday and picked up a future first. Yeah, they have not made any other picks. So this was the Rams' first pick, was to go get Terrence Ferguson, who, as you mentioned, was somebody that potentially could have gone later. This is the pick that they got as part of that trade back. So they traded back 20 selections. They were at 26. The Giants went up 20 picks to 26. Is that right? Or was it the Falcons? I don't know. Anyway, I can't remember the exact trades. One of them went back 20 picks, but now I feel like I'm conflating the two trades up to 25 and 26. Anyway, this is their first pick, and they went ahead and took Terrence Ferguson. I feel like they probably really like this guy. That's a tight end that you start talking about really liking him as well. I really like the landing spot. I'm pretty excited about that. They were reported, I guess the fascinating thing is they were reportedly in the market for a wide receiver if they didn't trade out of the first round, or there was some talk about that. They're kind of doing the same thing the Bears are doing, where it's like we can't have too many weapons. And I think from a team building perspective, that's fine, but they paid Devonta Adams a lot of money. They still have Puka Nacua. They paid Tutu Atwell $10 million to come back. They got a lot of players. They still have Tyler Higbee on this roster.
Well, it's interesting in terms of thinking about them trying to hit on their version of George Kittle. I love how they're putting their roster together. Again, you want that offensive juggernaut. It is interesting in that so much of what seemed to happen to Cooper Kupp at the end of last year was simply that Puka was so dominant from a target generating perspective that there was nothing left for him. The Rams have really gone out of their way to kind of send the message that they don't think that was the case. He was just completely washed. That's why he wasn't involved. That they do want the offense to be very multifaceted and not just Puka every play. Puka should obviously go super early in all drafts and all formats, but we are getting a little bit of eyebrow raising now in terms of how they're going to try and run their offense as well. I don't think that this hurts in the same way that Luther Burden hurts the Bears receivers, but certainly we're, I think, getting some insight into how the Rams want to run their offense.
They went out and brought in Colby Parkinson last offseason. Higbee was coming off an injury, played late in the year, presumably will be healthier in 2025, although, I mean, he's Tyler Higbee. He's another year older, coming back from a major injury. But they've got a few different tight ends now. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I'm definitely very optimistic about that. I'm kind of all caught up now, Sean, on what's been happening in round 2. I was talking about how we came out of the gates explosively with those first 8 picks. In the last 7 picks, we've had 4 defensive linemen. We've had the 2 tight ends, which has been fun. We've talked a lot about them. We just got a cornerback here as well. The Texans are back up. They took Jaden Higgins at 34. Curious to see where they go here. I do want to go back to some more round 1 discussions because we have talked about some of it, but we haven't talked about all of it. We talked about Hunter, and you acknowledged that he maybe doesn't have to be the 102 as I was talking about the other guys that are kind of in his tier. I want to know a little bit about what you think about the McMillan fit. I'm really excited about that. I was really excited about Deontay Johnson into this type of a potentially high target per route run role as the number 1 in a Dave Canales offense last year. Didn't really pan out. I think it could be really huge for McMillan and his skill set. 3-year early to clear, a lot of yards in college. I'm wondering if you're that hyped about the fit and the landing spot there. And then I also want to hear your thoughts on Hampton to the Chargers and how he fits in. Because I don't think you had an opportunity to really dig into those two earlier when we talked about Hunter a little bit.
Yeah, so we talked about a little bit as I was really talking about Jaden Higgins, but how McMillan should be an absolute star. And that's one of the reasons I actually moved him. I had GT in an entirely separate tier as the 101. I did not have McMillan jump him, but I did move McMillan into the same tier with him, which is something that in, I think, the first volume of the rookie guide, we also had those guys together. Famous.
That's what I was thinking. When I was asking you about Hunter as being the clear 102 last night, I don't know about the same tier, but I was thinking I would probably have McMillan as the 102. So I think you have them all the way up in the same tier. I think that's very interesting.
And there are a variety of, other things we can throw out. Blair was doing a really cool live wide receiver prospect score article last night where obviously you throw in draft slot and you remove a bunch of the stats that are kind of covered by draft slot and you have the new formula. His note there was that McMillan's post-draft score puts him on par with some of the best receivers of the last decade, but maybe still just barely short of the absolute superstars. One of the things that I thought was interesting when you look at how this offense will work is that the Panthers, once Young returned to the lineup in week 8 last year, the Panthers were number 10 in points above average per attempt and number 8 in WAR at the QB position. Right. So, Young obviously played fairly well. I think that fits with just kind of how that's perceived. He did that despite the fact that Xavier Legette posted a 0.43 racer in that same stretch. Now, adjusted for being a little bit more the vertical guy, you
said racer. Did you mean Whopper?
No, he's got a low racer.
Low racer, very low racer. Okay.
So you could look at this and say that if McMillan fits in as the main guy, and then you have obviously Thielen potentially underneath, you have Coker, whom we really like, rounding things out, that suddenly this now becomes and the Panthers, I don't think, have given up on Legette either. They've said some positive things about him. You want to keep saying those things until you actually do have the new receiver in tow, but then you're going to want to develop him as well. I think this is really positive for Young, and this is kind of that situation, maybe unlike the Hunter situation, where you have Ben, is it wrong to be thinking about this in a way where at midseason this year, it's actually more than likely that we'll be looking at Bryce Young as being substantially better than Trevor Lawrence? Because if that's the case, then certainly having McMillan with other guys to support him, but not really steal volume, is probably better. Now, one of the things I wrote in my write-up about Hunter is I'm not really worried about Brian Thomas being there. I think the offense will support both. But when we're thinking about ceiling outcomes and how that would work over multiple years and how McMillan's career would develop, if he doesn't really have a guy that he's the number 2 behind, you just have more ceiling there.
Yeah, I love the comparison, because I think it's really easy to look at Hunter and say it's a really great fit, a great landing spot, a great situation. The Brian Thomas thing, maybe is mildly problematic from the perspective that, Brian Thomas looks like he could be just such a star that he's going to have games that make it very difficult for the second guy to be a big producer. I compared it last night to maybe not that specific situation last night, but Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. How T. Higgins' production is very clearly, I think, capped at times when Jamar Chase just does what Jamar Chase does sometimes. He gets 20 targets in a game, and it's hard for you as a second receiver to do much. You can be efficient, but you're gonna get 6-7 targets, even when there's not even a lot of other stuff going on in the passing game in Cincinnati. Anyway, I don't think that's a massive concern for Hunter either in regards to what you said. Liam Cohen looks like a very good offensive mind. Trevor Lawrence looks like an above average quarterback for receiver production. Whether he's, a star himself, you just asked that question about whether Young could maybe be viewed more favorably than Lawrence by midseason this year. And I think that's a fascinating one as well. My point where I'm going here is the Jags are viewed, I think, very favorably, and I think rightfully so. But I think the case here is that Carolina is a sneaky, very good situation for a wide receiver to land into. Very good from the fact that Dave Canales is probably just as good of a coordinator as Liam Cohen. And what he was able to do with Bryce Young last year is that evidence. It's not that Bryce Young was perfect. It's that look at how bad Bryce Young was the year prior and where he got him to. And he was bad at the start of the season, so then he benched him for a while and was having success with Andy Dalton. And then whatever they were doing in practice and throughout the season started to make strides. Their film work, you're doing what you can behind closed doors. Dave Canales looks like a good young coach, period. A good hire by the Panthers, a good offensive scheme designer, a good personnel utilizer. Obviously, they were comfortable moving on from Jonathan Mingo, which I thought was probably a little bit of a favorable point. They tried to do what they could with Liggett. You're pointing out that Liggett struggled down the stretch. But then Coker was, you get a lot out of Coker, which is nice. But to your point, McMillan's going to have support, but not any kind of target competition in a meaningful way. It's a low-key, really exciting spot. And I think what you're saying about why Bryce Young may be viewed that way is not necessarily that it's going to be clear that Bryce Young's better, but that's going to be a successful situation in Carolina, that they're going to be able to take another step forward, because Canales showed what he was able to do with Bryce Young, moving him forward from 2023 to 2024. It doesn't mean he's going to have the same amount of growth into 2025, but if you do see that as a favorable thing, that you're talking about Bryce Young potentially even looking better than he should maybe in the middle of next year. And then we are collectively saying, yeah, he looks better than Trevor Lawrence. I mean, Trevor Lawrence has been playing for multiple more years. He's never had a season like this. If Young gets off to a nice hot start with this top 10 overall wide receiver there, it'll be very interesting to see. But I think the case, whether Young will look better than Lawrence or what have you, I think the case that you made really compellingly there, and I think is true, is that the Panthers are a sneaky, very favorable situation. And that it's not like Hunter got a way better landing spot in Jacksonville. And then when you also throw in the minor note about, hey, Hunter, it's good to have Brian Thomas in a lot of ways as well, but Hunter does have a true star wide receiver alongside him, a guy that was going 9th overall in pre-draft Underdog. This is a guy that going into year 2 already looks like he's going to be a stud. Brian Thomas. McMillan doesn't have that concern. He's got, from a traditional fantasy football analysis lens, he's got the ability to be projected for a lot of targets right out of the gate. It looks good for him. So yeah, I see him as pretty I see his landing spot as pretty favorable, and I see his early career trajectory as pretty favorable. Even if he's not the player that, even if he does have the downfield limitations that everyone thinks, etc. But then it's like, what if he is more than people think he is? What if he was held back a little at the collegiate level by his quarterback, by his scheme, by his situation? A lot of people talk about a worse 2024 after they lost their coach. And then there's people that say that, that was more situation than McMillan. And McMillan still had 1,400 yards. He backed up another great season, 3-year early declare, a lot of production. Very, very exciting. I see in the chat, Rupesh says Chase Brown surviving so far. Bengals just went linebacker. You mentioned it when we talked about it, I think on one of the shows or else off the air, but the Bengals have a lot of needs. They went edge and linebacker with their first 2 picks. They went some other directions than running back. We both agree that was a smart decision. The Bengals have a few really great players and then not a very deep roster. What you can learn from the Chase Brown success from last year is that you got a day 3 back to be a pretty productive back. I understand wanting a second player there with him, but ideally, when you have this many needs, you're not needing to complement that already day 3 pick with a high draft capital pick to continue to build out running back. That would probably not be the direction for the Bengals. They didn't go that direction in these first 2 rounds, which makes a lot of sense.
Then I have the running backs ranked pretty aggressively. So you could argue that I have something staked on the idea that they're going to go here in day 2. But the class is so deep. Somebody has to have a favorite, right? And somebody has to be that team that is going to make poor tactical decisions. But if all the teams acted appropriately, you could have all of the rest of the running backs falling out of day 2 now that Judkins and Henderson are gone.
Yeah, it could be a little bit of a tear break here. Seahawks, Elijah Arroyo, he becomes the 5th tight end to go. Harold Fannon still on the board. That's kind of the little talking point now, I think, for me, that so many tight ends are going and Fannon is not. It may pull Fannon up. It would be nice if he still went here in the 2nd, but is it going to be a pretty meaningful impact to your view of Fannon that he's now the 6th guy to go? And then also tell us a little bit about Arroyo in Seattle.
So I don't think Fannon's going to be hurt if he goes on day 2 and into a good landing spot. He could still be the best guy if he goes into a team situation where he's going to be a receiving threat. Arroyo is interesting. He's one of these guys where, again, we talk about the on-field tracking and how to put up a really fast time you essentially need a big play. And so in some ways, it's just saying the guy had a big play as opposed to is actually athletic. But he had a 21.8 mile per hour recorded play last year, which was one of the fastest on-field times for any player at any position. That I think you have to get pretty excited about. He is somebody who probably benefits from Ward. He's in this group of players at Miami who were pretty effective, but among the power conference tight ends with 40 or more targets, he had the best boom rate. He had the second best receiver rating behind Gunnar Helm, who it'll be interesting to see where he goes because of the injury that he theoretically tested through at the combine. He had the second best first down percentage behind Terrence Ferguson, who we already talked about. He had the third deepest ADOT. He was one of only 2 tight ends with 0 drops. Despite all that target competition, he was at, again, in the SIS numbers, which are different, the 2.2 yards per route run. All 5 of these guys who have gone are definite fantasy relevant players.
Yeah, that's exciting. We've had a lot of good tight ends coming in over the last couple of years. Continue to build out that position. Always fun for fantasy. We get an edge to Carolina right after Arroyo goes off. Definitely becoming the tight end round with 3 tight ends. We've not had.
Was there any chance that your mom was calling to spoil the Arroyo pick?
Is there any chance what?
Your mom was calling to spoil the Arroyo pick.
Oh,
do you like the situation here with Seattle?
She heard about Arroyo. I don't. I don't like anything that's going on with the Seahawks. I think they went and got that guard yesterday, which was probably the most favorable thing that I could see from the different things they're doing, that they did try to address the line a little bit. Although by some of the big board stuff, he was considered somewhat of a reach here on ESPN. They have him as 33rd overall ranked player. They took him at 18. That's why so many people were mocking him there, was he was not expected to go earlier, and they did take him. It's like, well, yeah, Seattle has this big of a need. They'll take this guard 15 picks ahead of, where he's, supposed to be going essentially. They did address the thing that they have to address with, which is line a little bit. And then they go get a tight end that maybe can help in that respect. But, Noah Fant, I don't think he's amazing or anything, but I still think somewhat favorably of, has not been successful in Seattle. I don't think that's, obviously the whole offense is going to change and everything, but you think about what Clint Kubiak's offense was with the Saints last year. Juwan Johnson was a guy that I was somewhat interested in as a late round tight end because they had so much available potential volume in the shorter to intermediate ranges of ADOTs with, Olave's profile and Shaheed's profile, and even some of the depth receivers profile. It was one of my big cases for Johnson, was just they got to use a tight end in that space a little bit. Really felt like an offense that could be doing that, and they just didn't, because that's not the way that his offense works. They did a lot of running, a lot of throwing to Alvin Kamara, and then a lot of play action, and then like deep overs and crosses where they're hitting wide receivers into the deeper intermediate range. And I think they'll do that with JSN, and I think that's why they brought in Cooper Kupp, and I think that's why they brought in Marcus Valdes-Scantling, who had some success with the Saints last year. They're really trying to fit talent to scheme. I thought that was a silly thing to do. That's part of why they went to Darnold, but we know Darnold's a pressure-sensitive quarterback. I don't think this one guard pick is going to solve their offensive line issues. He's going to be under pressure. He's not going to be great. He's going to probably be better than pre-Vikings Darnold. I don't think everything last year was a total mirage. I think he probably learned quite a bit playing under Kevin O'Connell, who's another one of those young coaches that I think is just so strong right now at evaluation and at teaching and getting the most out of his players and those things. But evaluation in that he knew he wanted to get rid of Darnold. We've talked about this on the show, but the Seahawks are the kind of I know better team this offseason, where the Rams wanted nothing to do with the guy that they love, Cooper Kupp. Like that Sean McVay was very close with, that Matthew Stafford was very close with. They wanted nothing to do with him. They were ready to move on from him. The Vikings wanted nothing to do with Sam Darnold, with bringing him back. And the Seahawks are like, well, we know better about these two players that you guys have a lot more information on. Maybe they'll be correct in that assessment. I don't think they're going to be. I don't think it's going to be a very good situation for fantasy football. I don't think a rookie tight end going in there to kind of split routes with Fant in an offense that I think will be, again, when I bring up the Kubiak stuff, Juwan Johnson had a few tight ends, a few hits here and there, but they also had Foster Moreau doing some stuff. It'll be 2 tight ends, and then they'll use them both interchangeably. The route rates won't be good enough. Yeah, it'll be JSN and Cooper Kupp that'll be the main receivers. It'll be a lot of 2 wide receiver, 2 tight end, run-based stuff. The offense might be okay for the run game, decent enough, especially when they can play from ahead. I think the offense is designed to work when they're playing from ahead. But no, I don't like the tight end fit to Seattle with the new offense and Sam Darnold and everything else they got going on there.
Well, that kind of leads me into a separate question that I had for you about some of these massive trade values that teams get from moving down. You talk about the reach here. The Chiefs got, if I'm thinking about this correctly, a 5th round pick to move down one spot and take the guy that almost certainly they were going to take anyway.
Right.
And that player could be, this is one of those things you say, and then we'll talk about all 3 of these guys later in the show because they'll all go in round 3. But that pick could end up being Tootin or Harvey or Giddens. It seemed like there was, you have to have a trade partner to move. And this isn't exactly the area that the Rams were supposedly trying to get into, but they talked about people wanting too much in order to move up. And so they ended up moving, down and out. It seems like probably there was the way to move. Do you like what the Chiefs did there? And, or, how are you seeing some of these trades that have happened?
The Chiefs, it was a 1-pick move. It was pretty minor. They picked up a 5th round pick. It could wind up being a star running back, but it's a 5th round pick. You just want praise for the Chiefs. And yes, it was undeniably a good trade. They moved back 1 pick and they got a free pick in the 5th round for it. They weren't going to take the pick at 31, Jihad Campbell. They were, I think, pretty clearly going to go with the tackle. And they knew, as soon as they moved back, that's why I felt like it might be Trayvon Henderson, because I felt like it was clear they were going to go for a position that they thought the Eagles weren't going to address. The Eagles maybe always are interested in tackles, but have such a good offensive line and obviously have Saquon Barkley. It seemed like these different positions that they were pretty confident the Eagles were not moving up 1 pick to address. And so they moved back a pick. They got a free 5th round pick.
But that matters. I want to push back on the idea that it's the 5th round pick, because
no.
Again, we think about like all of the praise that the Rams have gotten at times, all of the praise that the Seahawks got, back a decade ago when the Fantasy Douche was writing about this. It's like the reason that you got that is that you had a bunch of extra picks and then you did hit on some because you had a lot. You shouldn't get a pick like this from moving down. The Philadelphia Eagles should have sat there and said, you've got to make the pick of the guy that we don't want.
Right. Sure. There's people that would have said that. You're absolutely right. And I think this is a really interesting trade from that perspective. You're always doing this in our rookie drafts, I think, really smartly, making just little small trades here and there. Those extra picks do wind up accumulating and really mattering. I love playing Dynasty with you for that reason. You're a lot more patient than I am. I moved up 1 pick in my pre-draft rookie draft and gave away a 4th round pick that I didn't want or didn't think I would want to move up 1 pick to take Harold Fannon because I thought there was going to be this big drop off. And I was just looking at it a minute ago because Ferguson ended up going in the 4th round. And when he went, I was like, I would have probably used the 4th round pick on either a running back or a potential tight end in a tight end premium format. That's always fun with those 3rd and 4th round picks to be looking at tight ends. You've written about that before. So I looked at that. I looked back at it and I'm like, now that Ferguson went to a good landing spot, got really good draft capital, I may have traded up to get the worst tight end. Or I could have probably stayed pat, taken Fannon, and then maybe taken Ferguson. So yeah, you can't just give away these later round picks. They do end up costing you, or they take away the uncertainty. And uncertainty is opportunity, right? They take away the potential that you hit on something exciting, that you hit on Terrence Ferguson with your 4th round pre-draft rookie pick, and now he's a 2nd round in tight end premium pick. You don't even get that opportunity to roll the dice because you took that off the board. I do completely agree with that. All I was picking on you for was that there's like the Giants traded up and the Texans traded back, and the Falcon. You mentioned the Rams one, but you get these opportunities that like these teams are adding like future first. We could have highlighted those trades, but you seem really excited about.
Did you like moving into round 1 for Dart? Because the Chiefs, it seemed like we're on the clock for a long time as well, sort of running that down when you're the last team. They were pretty obviously looking for someone to come up and take Sanders even after they had traded down a pick. We now know, I have more information today, that teams were not that desperate to get up there and get him. But that trade for Dart. Dart is an interesting guy. We haven't talked about him yet. I kind of like this. I love it for him because now you've got Malik Neighbors.
Well, and we'll go to him for in just a second. I want to mention this note too from Ghost. He said there's 30 other teams. We don't know who else may have been interested in Campbell. I think probably this is what the Eagles are thinking. This was a big part of what I was thinking as it related to my trade up for, to move up one slot to get Fannon, was that I thought that some of the other league mates might be trying to move into that spot one pick ahead of me, because I felt like there was going to be a tier break there. And that was at like 301 or something in tight end premium. And Fannon has a really interesting profile, as you mentioned. If we see him go here, you said he could still wind up being the best tight end in this class. I mean, a really interesting profile. There's some concern that he's not athletic enough to be productive enough. He's like a good, but he's not bad, but not great athlete. But then the production stuff is like, for you and me, and we like to look at the production stuff on such a high level. The production stuff is so unique. So I've heard people say that the athleticism, because it's not great, and because most tight end hits do have great athleticism, that it's almost disqualifying because it's just good. And that's why I'm emphasizing it's not bad. His athleticism is not bad. It's just good. That may be disqualifying at the tight end position. For me, it's like when this guy's that much of an outlier on the production side, and in games that, yes, he was at Bowling Green, but in games against Texas A&M and Penn State, he basically carried them to almost upsetting those teams. It wasn't garbage time or anything. They lost those two games by like 6 points each, or I think it was 6-1 and 7-1. 1 point or one possession games in the end. Bowling Green almost upsets. I mean, they lost by 6 to Penn State, I think it was. Penn State went to the freaking national semifinal. And in that game where they lost by 1, Fannon had like 150 plus yards. I mean, he was the whole reason. They couldn't guard him. I mean, this guy is not just a product of, he played at Bowling Green. He's a ridiculous producer across the board. Anyway, Fannon's a very interesting guy, but you asked about Jackson Dart.
I don't know. As long as you're mentioning that, though, I don't know that this necessarily changes the other athleticism portions. And I don't even know that the tracking is correct, right? But at the Senior Bowl, his tracking numbers destroyed all of the other tight ends, some of whom then went on to test at the combine in a way where if he had tested at the combine like they did, he would have been a first-round pick, right? And so, again, when you talk about the production and why that matters, I think that is interesting, especially if you do have some of these other elements here. I do love that note from the comments about how it's not just a matter of the Chiefs potentially taking someone, but you've got to fend off all the other people the Chiefs could have traded that pick to. That's a good point. Jackson Dart, an elite vertical thrower, someone who gets criticism because of this Ole Miss offense. When Travis May was on OT, he pushed back on that. He said, don't worry about that element. This guy can really play. Certainly a lot of the numbers suggest that Dart can play, that he's athletic. You now have a team in the Giants making that bet. Now, the Giants have recently made some other bets on quarterbacks that didn't pan out. They don't have a great track record necessarily with some of these decisions. So I don't think that we necessarily say, the Giants drafted him, so he's good. But if you're going to go into a situation here where you have a very wide range of outcomes, I can't think of a better situation than having Malik Neighbors. We still think back to that massive Drew Lock game last year, where it's basically throwing the ball to Malik Neighbors and Neighbors doing everything. I think this rockets Dart up the board in Superflex, which isn't a controversial thing necessarily to say, but I think I might even be more excited about him than I would guess the community is.
I was going to say some pretty exciting things about him as well. I agree with you there. And I like the way you put it, that it rockets him up the board. It sort of depends on where you had him ranked previously, but you've talked a lot very favorably about him. I like Brian Dable still. I do think he's been hamstrung a little bit by the quarterback position, by Daniel Jones, by finding success with Daniel Jones in 2022 right away to the degree that they needed to extend him. I mean, even little things like Aaron Rodgers random, when he was going bashing everyone randomly, recently on Pat McAfee, randomly saying some really nice things about Brian Dable, even though the Giants eventually basically took themselves out of the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes.